need it prior to the age of 2. Now again, our kids incidentally will view it because, let's say, a movie's on or something like that, and they see it with their peers or their siblings watching it. But really, there's a lot of kind of risk factor that's associated with that. So that's really important there. The transitional object at this age, you know what, is not a big deal as long as the kids aren't necessarily taking their teddy bear every single place they need to go, including the bathroom at a department store. Allowing for transitional objects is okay, but it's used for reassurance. We just want to make sure it doesn't get excessively taken everywhere. And the other big thing is just encouraging healthy sleep is teaching kids not to fear that separation at night. Yep.
Why limit food and drink?
What's that?
Why limit food and drink?
Well, the reason is that when digestion occurs during the night, if there's too much food and drink intake, one is that it will increase the likelihood of bedwetting as kids get older. Obviously, when they're younger, it's not as big of an issue. But two is the more you eat right before bedtime, one, it increases the likelihood of digestion, which can cause actually kids to wake up a little bit more. Two, and some of the what's actually contained in the food, like if you think of your carbohydrates and things like that, may actually increase arousal or increase kind of wakefulness. So if kids do eat, try not to eat too much and try not to necessarily tie it. Like milk is probably okay right before bed, a little bit of food, but too much food and drink will just likely increase how awake they are and their digestion there.
So is there kind of a time?
Ideally, you know what, and I know our house it doesn't happen a lot. Ideally 30 minutes before is great to try to restrict. But even if you have 10 minutes, and think of the food that you're giving them. I mean, the foods, if they're really high in those simple carbs, things like that, they're probably going to increase arousal there. So, yep. Thanks for the question there. So this one, how much time do we have left? 5 minutes. This one's just around the idea of really decreasing their fear of the separation during night. One thing I really encourage you to consider is if your kid is scared at night, it's okay to have a night light. We know that too much light overhead impacts the melatonin system, and sleep is regulated by, one, how much has it been since you had the last period of sleep at all, but two, light overhead basically sends the message for the way that the system of the brain works is that it's time to wake up. But a small night light is likely not to disrupt that system, so it's okay to have that if your kids are afraid. Also, having a fan or white noise machine that drowns out just the little sounds that kids get scared of is a good idea. I mean, it's a really good idea to help with sleep overall. And really with naps, we've said routine plenty. I mentioned about the temperature control idea. And you know what? Reading before naps, reading before bed, anything that's calming like that is great because it builds in part of that routine. It just kind of builds in overall what kids get used to in general. So take home, and I'm going to leave time for just a few questions here, is young kids are generally resilient when it comes to getting sleep when they need it. Really, to be honest, 0 to 5 has a lot to do with building in good routines. And if you're building in good routines, like you mentioned, and you're still having trouble with sleep, certainly myself or others, there's ways to work on that, look at resources, but so much has to do with what does the environment in the bedroom look like. One thing I say to parents that comes up often is that if the bedroom looks like an entertainment zone and not like a bedroom, they're probably going to be activated. So it's okay to have a few things in there, but if it looks like it's full of toys and full of activating kinds of things, it's probably going to be difficult for them to get to bed. But the other thing is just that the routines themselves make such a big difference there. And they're also just incredibly important for us, just in our lives as spouses, just in our professions in general. So these are a few good books overall. Like I said, there's some sleep articles on my site if you pull those. And then, my time is all we're out. So that's how we feel at the end of some of these days, right? So questions, thoughts? I'll stay afterwards, by the way, for a few minutes too, if you have some.
Yeah, I have a question kind of going back to the anxiety and sleep.
Yep.
We have a 2-year-old, she's almost 3. She slept great as an infant. She'd sleep until like 8. We went on an anniversary trip back in October. She has not slept since.
Okay.
She is afraid to go to sleep. We have a very extensive bedtime routine. We have a sensory swing. We read books. I diffuse oils. I mean, we're doing everything. And she she will just sit there with her eyes open. So were we dealing with a sleep problem or an anxiety problem?
Well, it sounds like the first, you said 2 years, she was a great sleeper?
Yes.
Yeah, and so you had at least a good base of solid sleep patterns. So my guess right away is that based on whatever change or whatever thoughts were stemming after the trip, it's probably more of an anxiety issue than it is a sleep issue there. And the good news is, I mean, again, it's not uncommon for kids to have transition points like that where it changes their sleep patterns. I'm trying to think of a good resource for you. If you go on, here's another one for you guys. Center for Effective Parenting, Center for Effective Parenting, Arkansas Children's Hospital has some great handouts, and I know they have a couple on like early sleep issues, and I think one of them is related to anxiety there. If you don't find it, just contact our center and we'll certainly work to kind of find more. But based on what you said, because you had a good early sleep patterns, sometimes it's an illness, sometimes it's just, like you said, it was a trip or whatever. And I would go back through the sleep series that I mentioned, I would go back through kind of that part 2 and make sure that you're really kind of following that general sleep hygiene, those ideas. Because the thing I notice sometimes about like illnesses or trips is when you come back from it, sometimes even little subtle adjustments to that change the sleep patterns there. But yeah, I know it's not uncommon for that to happen there. And I would reassure, that's back to the idea of reassuring that sleep is not something to be afraid of and kind of using, like I mentioned, the slides here, which by the way, if anybody wants the slides, I'm happy to send those on, or you can kind of request those too. But I would guess that kind of addressing the anxiety is going to be most important there. So. Other thoughts? Anything else, John? Yep. We're good? Okay. Yeah, I'll stay after for a few minutes, but thank you very much. Appreciate you guys coming today. So, thanks.
Thank you.
And I'll sign, we'll walk around, I'll sign your certificates too.